Good afternoon. Good afternoon once more. Good afternoon, everyone. Kindly just by show of hands, show who's able to get me clearly and loudly before I can start off the session. Okay. Okay, Mr. Enzo, Mr. Mark, John, Angela. Okay, I think we're able to get each other, so we can lower our hands. Okay, then we can start off today's session. Okay. Ms. Chimuke, Zambia. Okay, so we can start off today's session. Let me just share the screen and we can start off. So today's session, as you're aware, today is animal health and veterinary medicine. And today, mostly, we're going to just focus on the veterinary medicine component of things. So let me just share the screen and we'll be able to start. Okay. Okay. So today, like I said, we're looking at veterinary medicine. That's our today's lecture. And what are we supposed to expect in the veterinary medicine component? Well, as per direction by your curriculum, we need firstly to look at the basics of feline anatomy, the basics of canine anatomy. These two I need to mention to say they're almost the same because they fall in the same set of carnivorous animals. So whenever we look at the skeleton for a dog, expect it the same to apply. Maybe just differences in shapes, but the same skeletons to apply and the same skeletal structures. If you look at the canine physiology, it's indirectly the same as looking at the feline physiology. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to just look at basics. We won't go so deep into, say, exploring each and every part, say every bone, talk about it in detail, where it's located and so forth, because looking at time, this, anatomy basically is a course in veterinary medicine practice, especially those who are doing DVM degrees to become a veterinary doctor. That is a course you have to do in 2 years. So it's not something we can finish in sessions in a month. So that's why basically I'm going to just touch here and there and there and there to just make sure we have a basic idea of what the anatomy and what the physiology is of our canines and our felines as well. So we're also later on, we're probably going to look at animal handling and how to assess the behavior of our animals that will help us in becoming better veterinary nurses. And we'll also later look at clinical procedures that a veterinary nurse should know. And also we'll also look at correct practices as a surgical assistant, and mostly that's in terms of asepsis. Okay, so we can kick it off with some of the terminologies which you or may or not be aware of. So the first one is asepsis. So asepsis is basically the absence of bacteria, viruses, and other microorganisms. So in asepsis, what you're trying to do is simply the exclusion of bacteria and other microorganisms, typically during surgery. So asepsis is we're trying to work in a bacterial and pathogenic-free environment. That's what basically asepsis is. Anatomy. Anatomy is simply a branch of science concerned with the bodily structures of humans, animals, and other living organisms, especially as revealed by dissection and separation of parts. And physiology, this is a branch of biology that deals with the normal functions of living organisms and their parts. So basically, physiology has to do with what is the function of this particular, maybe say organ, what is the function of this particular nervous system, or be it the respiratory system, be it the nervous system, the cardiac system, and so forth and so on. So basically, that's what physiology entails. You want to know the function. What is the importance of this system? How does it work in an animal's body? So, and then veterinary medicine, like the title of the course or module is, this is a supportive care of animals receiving treatment within a veterinary practice. So it's a type of supportive care which we have to give to animals while they're receiving treatment. What extra things do we need to do and so forth in order to nurse our animals properly? Because even when you notice, if say you go to a human hospital, not only is a surgery done on a person maybe who has say an orthopedic injury or accident, there will also be follow-up nursing that will do. These will include physiotherapies, they will include x-rays, they will include extra dosing of anti-inflammatories and so forth. So basically this is the same system which we also follow in veterinary medicine. So we'll basically try and look at all those components and so forth. Who's a veterinary nurse? A veterinary nurse works as a member of the veterinary team, providing expert nursing care for sick animals. Veterinary nurses also play a significant role in educating owners on maintaining the health of their pets. So basically, these are in our country here, we call them veterinary assistants. They're not called veterinary nurses, but in different countries, the name really varies. Others will be called veterinary nurses, and others will simply be called veterinary assistants. But it's the role is still the same in the group. So, what is a surgery? A surgery is simply a branch of medical practice that treats injuries, diseases, and deformities by physical removal, repair, readjustment of organs, tissues, often involving cutting into the body. So basically, this is more like being a mechanic for the human body. You know how when the car is down, you take it for repairs and certain parts are removed, certain parts are replaced, certain parts are joined together, and so forth and so on. Basically, that's also what we surgeons do, be it a medical human surgeon or a veterinary surgeon. So anatomy. So before you can know all these, how to take care of your animal, how to nurse an animal, a sick animal, how to be a better veterinary surgical assistant, how to perform certain basic surgical procedures and so forth. The first thing that definitely you need to know is the anatomy. And in this case, according to your outline of the module, we're going to look at the feline and the canine anatomy. So that's the basic. You have to know your anatomy before you can even proceed into knowing these other aspects. And like I said, I won't really go into name by name. So that would take us many years and many sessions for us to get just the full understanding of anatomy as it is. So we basically just look at anatomy in general, in the basics. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the skeletal anatomy. So we're going to have a broad view of how a skeletal anatomy of the feline and the canine animal is supposed to appear. And we're also going to look at a muscular anatomy, and we're also going to look at a general view. Where are the muscles located and what muscles and so forth, just to get a basic, like the term states, a basic understanding. We'll keep it as basic as we can, but also just to have an idea to say, okay, at this position, I expect this much this type of part, this type of structure, and so forth. We're also going to look at the cardiovascular anatomy. This will involve your veins and your arteries and how they flow through the body, because this will enable you to learn other techniques such as injecting and such as also blood collection and so forth. But because without the basic knowledge of where do the arteries, where do the veins pass, you won't be able to draw your blood properly. And also nervous system in general. Where do your nerves pass? How do your nerves connect to each other from the brain to the extremities of the body and so forth? So let's look at the skeletal anatomy of a canine slash feline, because like I said, when you look at the feline, it's the same as we've looked at the canine and vice versa. So from the top there, I'll just try and zoom it in. You have the second bone from your skull. It's called a C1 atlas. Then the second bone is called a C2 axis. Then we've also got a T1 first bone. So basically these bones that are running along the trunk here where I've zoomed, they normally have a sort of a first C later name, which denotes what part of the region we're looking at. So in terms of the spine, there are 4 or 3 categories of type of bones that are there. So you've got your the C1 and C2. These ones are simply denoting cervical. So these are the cervical bones. This because they're in the cervical area or your neck. So that's why you see C1, C2. Then you've got your T1. Your T1 simply means thoracic. So this is talking about the thoracic vertebra. All these you see running along are called vertebral bones or vertebra. Then you also see where your L1 starts from, and different species have got different numbers of thoracic and even lumbar. L is for lumbar. So your L1 stands for lumbar 1 vertebrae. Then at the end there, we've got the coccyx bone, which is cordovertebrae. The cordovertebrae is simply the one for the bone for the tail, that where it starts from and it goes as far as the last part of the tail. So all these denotations, I won't go in detail, like I said, but it's just to give you an idea. So all these here, running along up to your tail, these are your vertebrae. So from there, on this side, we've got our scapula being labeled there. This is simply the shoulder blade, as you can see there. I wish I had a pointer. I need to try and learn how to create a pointer on Zoom session. We've got our scapula there, which is simply on the side. When we go down a bit there, we've got what is called the cranial end of the sternum or the manubrium. Then we've got the humerus. The humerus is simply, even in your hand, the first bone of the four limbs. This is the first bone which connects from the shoulder to the elbow joint. That's what we call the humerus. Then from there we have this sharp, which in our cases is called an elbow. The point of where it says point of elbow, we call that the olecranion. And then from there, we've got the radius and the ulna. The bigger bone is the radius, and the smaller bone is the ulna. Then down there, we've got our carpal bones and proximal, middle, and distal phalanges right at the bottom where the feet end. Then in the middle there, of course, you've got your rib bones there. And on the back, on the hind leg, we've got the femur, which is the one connecting immediately from the pelvis up to the first joint or the knee joint of the leg. If you're likening it to a human, we'll call that the femur. So, and then even on humans, we've got what is called the patella, that small bone on the knee that protrudes on its own. It's known as a patella. Then from there, you've got on your calf, this is the equivalent of the calf. We've got the tibia and fibula. In the human, you can refer to it as the calf part of the leg. Those are the bones that are found, the tibia and the fibula. So from there now, we've got the tarsal bones, the metatarsal bones, and of course, these other bones, which are almost the same, down the phalanges and so forth and so on. And then on the heel joint there, which we can liken to as the heel joint in terms of us as humans. In these canines and felines, it's called the calcaneus bone or the point of the hawk. So that's basically the skeletal muscle in general. There's so many, believe me, there's so many other bones here, but these are the main bones that we need to at least have an idea of where are they and what are they doing. So in your free time, you can take time to go through them and have an idea. Let's look at now the muscular anatomy of things. So this is now the actual skeletal muscle. We've now put muscles to it. This is how the muscles would appear if you were to skin your dog or your cat. So basically, I'll start from the head, then heading all the way on the back, then come down underneath here. So the first bone we have, the first muscle we have, is what they're calling masseter. These are simply muscles that are used in terms of mastication. Mastication is simply a biting process, which even us as humans, we have similar type of muscles, but of course the development and the configuration and anatomy placement is different because of the shapes, but they function the same way in mastication or chewing, moving the mouth up and down and so forth. Then on the back there, we've got the first thing we've got is the brachiocephalic muscle, which attaches down onto the foreleg. Then we've got the trapezius muscle here, which is also attaching to the top of the foreleg or forelimb. Then we've got the latimus dorsi, which is running all the way to the dorsal part of of the muscles. We've got the serratus ventalis, the external abdominal oblique. This one, as you can see, it's running almost from the pelvis up onto the other back. We've got the medial gluteal here, which is basically attaching onto the back. And we've also, inside, we've also got the superficial gluteal. This one runs deep inside the muscles. And usually you will notice to say your gluteal muscles, when you're doing injections, those are the ones you target. Our gluteal muscles in these animals can be likened to our stomach, not our stomach, but our buttock muscles. Those are the one and the same. In humans, those are the ones you call your buttock muscles there, where you receive your injection. And this is normally the site we normally also inject, because this is where the gluteal muscles are. And that's where the thickest muscles to appear. On the sides here, we've got the semitendinosus muscle. We've also got down on the side here, the interosseous muscle, which is just binding the hind leg there on the point of the heel, or the calcaneus joint bone, which we looked at earlier. Then we've got also the gastrocnemius muscle there, long digital extensor there, biceps femoris, centauras on the side, deep pectoral, lateral ulnar muscle. Then we've got on the side. Please bear with me. I'm really rushing through these because, like I said, anatomy is something you learn in 2 years. In veterinary school, vet med school, we actually learn in 2 years, and I'm trying to compact it in, say, I don't know if this is 18th November. I'm sure maybe we'll have 2 extra sessions on this before we can get to another topic before November ends, because this whole module has been targeted to be completed by November. So I'll try to just give you basics. So what you grasp is what you grasp, and what you want is what you want, because basically all these muscles we're talking about is supposed to talk about them one by one and explore where they attach, where they end, where they start from, and so forth. But this is not something we can easily do in a short period of time. So this is just to give you a deep overview of understanding of some sort. Okay, so we've got deep pectoral muscles, lateral ulnar. So I'll start now from the bottom here, where there's the feet. We've got the oblique carpal muscle, the lateral digital extensor, the common digital extensor. All these are helping the digits extend or relax and so forth. All the movements that are to do with the paws and the lower part of the hind leg are being mediated by this. And we've got also the extensor carpi radialis. We've got the brachialis muscle. These ones are simply for the brachial point of the muscles, or which you can liken to your triceps and biceps. In terms of humans, we've got the tendon muscles. We've got the infracipitous muscles, which are running all the way from the back of the scapula, and we've also got the sternophacalis muscle. So go on to the next slide, which is now, this is the ventral aspect. As you can see, that view of muscles, it was just on a side view. We call that the lateral view, but this one is the ventral view now. So we're sort of looking at the dog from upside down to see what muscles are down there. So we've got also the muscular, I'll start from my left there. From my left of the screen, where I've zoomed. So we've got the musculus masseter, which is on the side. That's the same one. That's how it runs deep, but it's the one that helps with masticating, like I said, or chewing. The musculus cleidocephalicus muscle. We've got the homotransversus muscle, tendodius muscle, intersections clavicularis muscle, and so forth, and biceps brachii muscle. This one is the same as your biceps in humans. Then we've got the triceps brachii muscle. These are also the same as the ones in humans. So even in humans, we've got triceps and biceps, which gymists tend to go and work on and try and enlarge and so forth. So we've also got the musculus pectineus muscle. This is down here on the hind legs. I don't know if we're able to view that. So then we've also got the musculus pectineus muscle. Like I said, the musculus adductor muscle. These are the ones that are responsible for adducting, or in terms of spreading legs. So I can link it to gymnasts and in humans. So gymnasts have got a tendency of splitting their legs as far parallel to the ground as they can. So these muscles, the adductor muscles are well developed in terms of for gymnasts because they're able to stretch their legs and so forth. These are the muscles that are responsible for that. So even in the dog, these are the muscles that help it stretch its legs or bring back its legs and so forth. Those are the muscle adductor muscles. We've got the musculus sartorius pascodalis muscles, the musculus tensor fascia latae muscles, and the musculus gracilis muscles. So on the other side, we've got all these other muscles, which if you have in your free time, you could look at it. As I'm looking at time, and I bet I'll just be mentioning muscles and I'll end up boring you without going to the more interesting aspect of things. But basically, that's to give you an idea. Like I said, I'm trying to compact everything and bombard you with everything at once, and hopefully you get what you get. But this is basically your anatomy. At least you have to have a basic or a general understanding of where the muscles are and how they're looking like. So now let's look at the cardiovascular anatomy. So this one is just anatomy, dealing with how your blood is flowing, how the veins run, how the arteries move, and so forth. But this one and this one you should pay particular attention to, because it will help you in knowing where to collect your blood and where to inject from, where not to inject from. In case you're cutting and doing an operation, you're able to say, okay, I'm so not supposed to cut here, as I'll end up cutting a major vein that will likely cause a lot of blood loss in terms of when you're doing a surgical operation, or just even injecting your injections and collecting blood as well. So these are some of the points to be well aware of whenever you're doing your surgical. And as usual, I'll start from the top. I'll try and start. So there is your heart. Your heart pumps blood, of course, to the caudal part, which is the lower part, and also to the cranial part, which is your upper part of the body, and in this case of the dog. So on top there, we've got from the heart there, we've got also, of course, the aortas, which branch off to what we call an internal thoracic aorta, which is going down the thorax. Then we've also got the intercostal arteries, which are branching off from the renal aorta. And we've also got the abdominal aorta. If we go down, it's the one that's continuing after the renal aorta breaks off. Then down from the abdominal aorta, it will branch off into the left external iliac artery, which will go down now into your left leg, into the left leg of the animal, and also the right external iliac artery will go down onto the right. So, but this one is just showing us the left view of the animal. So now we've also got the cranial gluteal arteries, the caudal gluteal arteries. So these ones, like the name suggests, they're supplying the gluteal muscles. And we've also got the deep femoral artery. So like the name suggests, so certain names try and relate them to the part of the bone or the area it's supplying. So that will even give you an idea, where do I find this particular artery? So a deep femoral artery, of course, you expect it to run deep, close to the femoral bone. Then we've also got a medial circumflex artery. We've got the pundetal epigastric trunk, which is just running there from the left. It's branching off from the left external iliac artery. Then we've got the femoral artery, which is branching down and continuing down onto the femur. Then from the femur there, we've also got a breaking of the distal caudofemoral artery, which is breaking from there and going distally or down. Distal simply means down. Yeah, so you see the problem with compressing things. There are certain terms you're going to miss because I can't define them any deeper. So, but anyways, with the permission of our coordinators, I'll try and extend it better and see if we can relay this in a better approach. But for now, we're just going to deal with a summary form of the lecture. So we've got the saphenous artery, we've got the cranial branch of the saphenous artery, and we've got the dorsopedal artery that runs all the way down. So then this side, we're dealing now with the cranial part of the body. We'll start with the first one here, which is the infraorbital artery. So this one is simply supplying the orbit part of the eye. The orbit is simply that globe where the eye fits. So this is the vein that supplies it. Then we've also got the facial artery, which is basically supplying most of the area of the face and branching off to the end there. And all this is branching from the internal carotid artery. And there's also the common carotid artery, which is branching off to form the internal carotid artery and also the lingual artery. The lingual artery on the other side, as you can see, it's running down onto the tongue and down there, which is obviously supplying all the mouth area part, as the name suggests. So then we've also got the left and right common carotid artery. We've got the costal cervical trunk, left subclavian artery as well, brachiocephalic trunk, aorta. Then on the side, we've got the aorta. This is where now near the heart. We've also got the brachial artery, which is the one that's coming straight from the aorta and then supplying all the brachial or the part of the four limbs as well. We've also got the collateral anal artery, superficial brachial artery, common intercessus artery, median artery, ulnar artery, and radial artery, and median artery down all the way to the four limbs. So I think that's as best as we can try and summarize and have an idea of where certain veins, certain arteries are located. So in terms of veins, these names we've actually tackled. Veins and arteries, as we are aware, they actually move at the same, they move parallel to each other. So where you expect that there is a renal artery, expect there will be a renal vein as well. Where you see an abdominal aorta, expect there will also be a vein laying side by it, and so forth. Where there's a median artery, there has to be a median vein, and so forth and so on. Most of them run parallel to each other. So these ones are just showing you the artery point of view. And of course, in terms of relating, you can just change the name and put a vein in order to get where the certain arteries or veins are located. Like I said again, as a student, take time to just go through this whole structure and maybe know where your veins are. But the ones you normally should be well aware of are the ones mostly in your hind limbs, because that's where you've been doing most of your injecting from, so that you don't miss or inject into major veins or arteries that might cause hematomas and all sorts of reaction. And also, of course, just master also the facial area as well, and see how basically the veins run, even the truncal side of things, because there's certain times you'll be administering fluids even from the skin, and you might miss it and enter directly into your aortas and so forth. So it's just to give you basic knowledge and overview of how basically your veins and your blood supply and circulation is. So now canine internal anatomy. So now what we're going to basically look at now is how the basic organs, your liver, your brain, the heart, the abdomen, and how they're located in canines and in felines. So that's a basic overview. And unfortunately, this particular slide is too slanted, so too compressed rather, so we won't be able to read anything from. But we can take up things from here. So now, in terms of the anatomy for internal organ general anatomy, you've got your brain, you've got your spinal cord, you've got your stomach there, you've got your spleen, your kidney, your colon, your rectum, and the tail part of things. Down from this side, you've got your hind leg, the small intestines there, the liver located just directly after the lungs. Then you've got your lungs, then you've got your foreleg, then you've got your heart that is just lying on the bottom. So now, in terms of auscultation, this should also give you an idea where to auscultate from. In terms of when you're trying to check for the heart rate and of the animal, of your dog or your cat, this is usually the location to target, just near where the foreleg ends on your left side. That's where you get the best palpation on that region there. So just basically that's to give you an idea in terms of even if you're doing a surgery, you're able to see, so where should I incise? in order to enter, which place of the body should I, but like I said, your role in surgery and so forth will be just simply to be an assistant in terms of a surgical assistant. But even you as an assistant, you need all this knowledge, all this basic knowledge in order to know what's really going on. Where are we targeting? Which organ are we going to? And so forth. So on the other side, we've got your esophagus and your trachea, and always take note to say in the neck or cervical region, the trachea is always below, while the esophagus is always above, in terms of location. Okay, so we can go on to the next slide. Okay, physiology of canines and felines. So physiology, like we said, is us trying to find out the functions and how these organs work. So we've talked about all these organs. We've talked about the cardiovascular system. We've talked about the nervous system, how it's running. We've talked about the skeletal system, and yeah, we've also talked about the skeletal and also the muscular system as well. How are they running? So now we want to know, how do they function? That's what basically physiology is. So basically, how do previous mentioned structures work? So I think at least here, this is where things will become maybe a little interesting, rather than all these nomenclatures of knowing. So this is your nervous system. I'm sure I skipped this one. We'll have to do this one. So the nervous system, on your brain, you've got the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the medulla oblongata. Down, you've got your spine that's running on the back of the dog. Then you've got your sciatic nerve, which runs just on the back and inside the gluteal muscles there, down onto the hind leg. Then from the forelimbs, you've got your brachial nerve, which is running all the way from the spine down onto your forelimbs. Then also you've also got your facial nerve. That's basically your nervous system there. So now, like I was saying, we want to know, how do these things function now? Because we know now we have a basic idea. I think in 20 minutes or 30 minutes, so we just had a basic idea of what their names are and so forth. Now we want to know, what is it that they do in terms of the body. So, and basically physiology is almost standard. What the nerve does in one animal or in the human is what it does in also a dog, in a canine, and the feline as well. So basically this physiology will be general and very basic. We won't go into details to say what hormones are involved and so forth, but it will be as basic as it can to try and just give us an overview of how these same particular muscles and anatomies we've looked at work. So now, some of the definitions we need to know. What is anatomy? You might have been talking, so we're learning now anatomy of the canines and the feline. What is it about? So it is basically, like I said, even in the beginning, the study of structures of living things. And what is physiology, which we're looking at now, trying to determine? This is the study of functions of living things. It can be mechanical functioning, it can be physical, or it can be biochemical on a micromolecular level. Okay, so anatomy, where does this word come from? So this word is made up of two Latin words of Latin region, which is ana and tom. Ana means again, or to go back. Then tom means to cut. So if we put these two terms together, it simply means cut again or go back and cut. That's simply what anatomy is. It might sound a fancier term, but that's what basically it means, to go back and cut again. So in short, if we were to break down and define it better, this is the study of the structure of the animal body and relationships to many other parts. So we're going back, we're cutting it in and trying to determine what is it where is it placed and what is it that it's doing. That's basically anatomy. So anatomy can either be macroscopic anatomy or microscopic anatomy. So macroscopic anatomy is also called gross anatomy. So this is seen with the naked eye by dissection. So these are body parts, your body organs, which you see. If we dissect an animal, we'll be able to see its internal organs. If say we're targeting the GIT, or the gastrointestinal tract in full, we'll be able to see all those. So now these are organs and organ systems. These are basically the ones you can see. Then we've also got microscopic anatomy. These are anatomies which you can only be able to see if you were to view under a microscope to say how are they aligned. So these ones have to do with, have got basic branches such as cytology, which is the study of cells. Cells is also part of your anatomy, but on a microscopic level. Then we've also got histology, which is the study of the 4 basic types of tissues. What are these basic type of tissues that almost every animal, including us, have? So the 4 basic type of tissues are, we've got the epithelial tissue, which is basically, this is the type of tissue which is only outside of each and every animal's body. But in our case, it's our skin and it's muscle related to it. And in the case of maybe a dog, it's fur and also the underlying skin that the fur attaches to. Then we've also got your connective tissue. This is the one that now helps to connect or line everything together. After the skin, this is the other one. Then we'll put the muscular tissue. This is where now all these fancy muscles we were looking at and mentioning their names are found. These are your muscular tissue. Then you've got the nervous tissue. These are the ones that we looked at the end, which just simply transmit nerve impulses and nerve signals in an animal's body. So now, what are the functions of the epithelium? These ones, they covers the organs, it lines the viscera and the blood vessels. That's basically it. The epithelium is simply the outside coating of every animal. So we are basically coated by an epithelial layer of group of muscles. This is where even your skin comes in, the fur, the feathers in case of birds and so forth. All that is part of the epithelial lining of every animal. So the secretory cells, it's also it's also composed of your glands, the sweat glands and so forth. All those are part of the epithelium as well. So what is the functions of now connective tissue? Connective tissue, this one provides mechanical support. It provides place for metabolic exchange. So the connective tissue is basically the tissue that helps connect different types of maybe muscle tissues, even organs and so forth. It helps, give mechanical and structural support in general. Without the connective tissue, everything would seem wobbly. Even in any animal, you wouldn't have this consistent, which we have, whereby you're able to see, oh, there's a head here, there's a neck here, but it would be, how do I say it? It would be actually very weird to see each and every animal, including us as humans, if we didn't have connective tissue, would basically be moving skeletons with very distinct structures. But we've got this consistency in how the body flows, the way God made it. It made it in a beautiful way to say you're able to see consistency even when the body parts are changing. So it's this connective tissue that tends to hold all these particular single muscles and single organs and organisms in place. So it also provides a place for metabolic exchange. So with this one, this is where now all these exchanges, such as excretion of, say, maybe excess fluids, excess glucose, excess waste and so forth, and also in ingestion of certain glucose into the cells and all those things, all those type of metabolic exchanges. This is the organisms, and or should I say the medium in which all these processes take place. It provides a place for energy storage. So your connective tissue can be a form of energy storage. As we talked about in animal nutrition, you've got all your lipids and your adipose tissue storing up when there's too much fat being undertaken. This is where all that is stored in the animal, in the connective tissues. It provides a place for inflammation. Inflammation is simply the increase in size of particular muscle. It also provides a place for fibrosis, or which is healing. This is simply when, say, an animal is injured, there has to be fiber that has to fill up that particular place. So all these happen in connective tissue area. So connective tissue and red blood cells. So how do these two interrelate? The connective tissue of the animal and the red blood cells. What are the red blood cells? Firstly, these ones carry oxygen to and carbon dioxide from the body, the body's tissues. Then we've got white cells, which are manufactured in the bone marrow and pass through the blood to connective tissue for defense. So basically, all these, the ones that are carrying oxygen and the carbon dioxide to and from, are basically taken to the connective tissue as well. And also the white blood cells, which are actually helping in the body's defense, they're also coming to and from the bone marrow to the connective tissue as well. So that's the interrelationship there. We've also got platelets, which help in acting as blood clotting factors. So let's look at muscular tissue. So on the top right corner there, that's simply a microscopic view of a muscular tissue that has been put under a microscope. So now, what are the functions? This one generates contractile force. It helps the body to contract and to release as well. So let's look at also nervous tissue. Nervous tissue simply has to do with nerves. So we've got all these on your right. That image there is showing you the type of nerves that are there. You've got your unipolar, your bipolar, pseudo-unipolar, and multipolar type of nerves. We won't go too deep into this. Like I said, all this is a 2-year-long topic. So for me, we're just going to know the basics. And for now, it's just brainstorming shooting you with a lot of knowledge and hoping what sticks. But basically, by the end of this lesson, I hope you have as much information in your veterinary nursing practice and so forth. So what are the functions? They provide transmission, reception, and integration of electrical impulses. This is basically what the nervous tissue does. It will provide transmission, reception of all these nervous impulses or electrical impulses that enable us to think, that enable the animal to locomote or move, that enables the animal to have all these sensory smells such as sight and so forth. So organs, let's now look at the organ system of the body. So organs, by definition, this is a distinct collection of 2 or more tissues that forms a specific function or functions. So an organ is a collection of a lot of tissues. You can have 2-3 tissues acting together to form an organ, which will now have a bigger role or function. So examples of organs, the bones, when you collectively put them together, that's a tissue. You've got your brain. Your brain has got different tissues, but together it forms a brain which functions together to help. And we've also got your liver, your kidney, the heart, and so forth. These are examples of some of the organs. So let's look at now organ systems. So an organ system is a group of interconnected organs that work together for a common purpose or purposes. So an organ system, you might have said the urinary system. A urinary system will be made up of either a penis or a vagina. From there, you have all these urinary tracts that would take now the urine from the bladder. There will be a bladder organ, and so forth. So it's a whole connected system, but together it's working together to form one purpose, which is excreting excess urine, excess nitrogens, and excess ketones, and so forth, and all these other waste products that the urinary system excretes. But all in all, they're working together as a system. So what are the organ systems that you expect to find in an animal's body? You've got your digestive system. So your digestive system runs from the animal's mouth up to the anus. Then you've got your respiratory system. This also runs from the mouth and nose down up to the lungs and the capillaries and so forth. That's a whole complete respiratory system. Your urinary system, like I said, it will start from the genital organ up to the bladder. And then you've got your reproductive system. This will also run from the genital organ up to where the sperm or the ovaries and the ova, which is the eggs, are being produced. You've got your musculoskeletal system. This is a system, of course, that help the animal move and locomote. This is also running in different ways and at different positions. Then you've got your endocrine system. This is a system that's basically involved with hormones, how the body responds to certain maybe threats or certain physiological conditions. Say when it's hot, how does the body respond? How do the hormones respond and so forth? So the endocrine system is responsible for such. You've got your nervous system. This is basically your nerve electrical impulses from the brain up to commanding all the organs and systems of the body, and telling it whether to move, to react in a certain way, and so forth, and so on. You've got your integumentary system. This is a system that has to do with the covering of the body, be it a skin in the human, the fey, and all the external covering. That's the integumentary system. Then you've got your cardiovascular or circulatory system. This has to do with your veins and your arteries. Then you've got your lymphatic system. This is a system that is involved mostly with the immune system, how the white blood cells are taken from where they're manufactured from to where they are going to fight off germs and bacteria, viruses, and so forth and so on. So that's the lymphatic system or the immune system. So there's a channel which they also follow as well. So now let's look at the integumentary system. So with this one, it's made up of three main layers. You've got your epidermis. This is the outermost layer of the skin. You've got your dermis. This is beneath the epidermis and consists of the connective tissue, which we talked about earlier in brief. Then we've got the hypodermis. This is the one, the innermost layer, which is made up of a subcutis. The lowest, and it's the lowest layer of the skin and mainly houses fat. So this is in your hypodermis is mostly where you find fatty tissues and adipose cells, which will be able to store fats and for insulation of the body and so forth. So here on the right, there's this whole graphical experience of the outer integumentary system and how it looks, its layers and how they are aligned together. You've got your hair follicles there, how your veins and how your arteries are running to supply this system as well. Okay, what are the functions of skin? Mind you, almost every animal actually has skin. Mostly all we see is fur and hair, but all animals are actually made up of skin. It's just that us, the way we are developed, we show most of our skin and less of our hair, our fur on the outside. So basically this structure is and these functions apply to all animals. I'm sure you might be seeing a hand of a human there on the slide and thinking, is this necessary for a canine, a feline? But basically, even those have got skins and have got the same basic functions. So what are the functions of the skin? It protects against injury and desiccation, which is simply splitting of the skin. It maintains a water balance. It excretes certain substances through sweating and sweat pores. It provides thermoregulation, and that's also through sweating. And it receives stimuli. Stimuli is simply a stimulation that the skin is likely to receive and give the entire animal's body a response towards. It can be a stimulus in terms of temperature. If it's too hot, it will likely give a sensory stimulus to say to the brain to say it's too hot. Can you move away? Can you run and so forth? If it's painful, it will also give the same sensory type of stimulus to the brain. And if there's too much pressure, say it's in a place where the body is compressed, the animal is uncomfortable, it will still give that response. It provides a basis for recognition of well-being. So it's through the skin and through the outer layer of every animal that you're able to tell, to say, oh, this pet is this pet is Desai, this pet is what's my favorite, bubbly, and so forth. You're able to recognize different animals just the way we're able to recognize different humans through the skin and also through the outer layers and so forth. The skin color, the fur color, the hair color, and so forth. It provides the basis for recognition, and it provides the place for fat metabolism in the hypodermis. So like we mentioned earlier, the innermost layer of the skin or the integumentary system is where most of the fat in the animals are stored. So this hypodermis is mostly developed in pigs. As you can see, pigs have a lot of fat in the integumentary system. So this hypodermis is mostly developed in pigs. So now, parts of the functions of the musculoskeletal systems. So we're now going to look at the musculoskeletal system. So the muscles, this is a system of levers that aid in muscle action. So levers are simply machinery. So it's the way the muscles are arranged in our bodies, that sort of machinery, which help or work synergistically together to give more like a working machine. So if one muscle contracts, the other one will relax to make a particular movement and so forth. So there are 3 types of muscles that are in every animal's body. We've got the smooth muscles, we've got the skeletal muscles, and we've got the cardiac muscles. So the smooth muscles are the ones that are mostly in your internal organs. The internal organs, be it your heart, the stomach, the liver, and so forth. All those are type of smooth muscles. Then we've got the cardiac muscles, which are on your heart, and the ones that are run in the aorta, the vein, and so forth. Then we've got the skeletal muscles, of course. These are the ones that now cover all your skeletal bones and facilitating locomotion and so forth. So then we've got the bones. These bones are the ones that provide support and protection. These ones, we've either got long bones. These ones are mostly in the hind and forelimbs of the animal. We've got short bones. These are mostly connective. We've got flat bones, and we've also got irregular bones. There are all these types of bones that I'm sure we all looked at the time we're just scrolling through and naming the bones. And if I was to name them here, if you remember earlier, you've got all these sections, even on your vertebra, the cervical vertebrae, the thoracic vertebrae, the lumbar vertebrae, the sacral vertebrae, and the caudal vertebrae. This is basically standard. I'm sure you remember that last time when we started earlier, when we're looking at the skeletal system, we're looking at the skeletal system of a dog. But if you were to compare it also with this one, you'll see that basically the naming is the same. It's just maybe the conformation, the sizes, and the numbers that vary. But in terms of the name, it's always standard. They're all the same. That's why we tried to just compact it and give it to you just as is, so that you just have a basic idea to say in almost every animal, I'll find the patella, in almost every animal, I'll find the pelvis, and so forth. Okay. So now let's look at joints. Joints are also part of the musculoskeletal systems. So joints, these form the junction between 2 or more bones. So between any 2 or 3 or more bones, you always find a joint in between there. So then we've also got cartilage. This is almost in every bone extremity, be it the ulnar or elbow extremity, you always find cartilage. This is just simply for cushioning. It's the body's mechanism way of preventing deterioration and friction between various bones. So you always find cartilage caught in all the extremities of bones to help cushion them. Then we've also got ligaments. These are type, I'm sure if you've seen on this last slide here showing a human leg, you've seen this ligament starting from the heel up until we connect with the ulna. So all this that you're seeing here is basically a connective ligament tendon or ligament, which is helping connect various bone to bone. Then we've also got tendons. It attaches the muscles to the bones. So you have this connection where your skeletal muscle is ending. It will be attached by a tendon, which will take the connection to the bone. Okay, so basically these are the other components of the musculoskeletal system. So now, what are the functions of a muscle? It produces contractility. Contractility is simply movement. If you've noticed, if you contract one muscle, the other one relaxes. So the mechanism is very simple. If say I want to lift my hand up or lift, say, a bottle of Coke in my hand, what will happen basically is maybe my biceps will contract, but my triceps will have to relax to enable that movement to take place. So there are all these combination of muscle movements that will help contractility. But all in all the skeletal muscles, they work together in synergy, in running, in walking, in jumping, and so forth. They produce sport posture. So for every animal, you're able to see the posture it's having from the way the muscles are arranged. It's the muscles that will give every animal, be it human, be it a dog, it's the ones that will give them a posture. It stabilizes the joints. As we've seen, the joints are stabilized by the muscles. The muscles are the ones that keep the joints in place and connect them properly. It produces heat. So these are the ones that cushion us and cushion the animals and help provide heat as well as a heat source. Functions of the cartilage. This one on your right side of the screen, there's a bullet that says no nerves, no pain during compression of cartilage. So what in the cartilage, first things first you need to know is that there's no nerve supply. So whenever there's a compression of the cartilage, whenever there's that friction between bones, or any animal, even us, we don't feel any sensation. Because believe you me, if we had nerve supply in our joints, our actual cartilage joints would actually be feeling a lot of pain, because these locomotion and friction processes that happen there are definitely very sensory and painful to a certain extent. So that's why most of the cartilage, in general, cartilage do not have any nervation, any blood supply or any nerve supply. So that's to help your sensations as well. It's to protect the animal from actually feeling any pain while there's a lot of work going on in these joint areas. So what are some of the functions of these cartilages, which are in the extremities of the bone? They provide flexible support to the ears, the nose, and the respiratory tract. So in your ears, if you've noticed, the ear of every animal, even including us as animals as well, of course, when you touch your ears, it has that wobbly and sort of inconsistent feeling. You can't call it bone, but it's sort of rubbery and yet inconsistent. That's cartilage. That's how cartilage basically feels like. So the ears of every animal is made up of cartilage. The nose, for instance, that tip is made up of cartilage, and so it can easily break anyways. So that's even your respiratory tract, the trachea, which is the one that carries the air to and from the mouth, the nose to the lungs. It's also made up of cartilage. This same type of tissue, if you can just do a simple experiment and touch your ears or your nose, you'll be able to feel that type of material. That's cartilage. So slides across each other in the joint. So there's all these sliding and friction forces that happen between them. Whenever an animal is walking and so forth, there are all these frictional movements that happen. So it's the cartilage that enables these movements to happen. So it's through this same lack of innervation and the lack of blood supply that helps them to create these movements without us feeling pain. It also provides cushioning of the joints as well. Functions of the bone. Okay. So now these ones, they provide firstly skeletal support. So without of course bones would be basically wobbly cells that are moving, but with bones in us we have this stable structure, and all animals as well. All vertebrate animals have got the same. So it provides protective enclosure. The skull is to protect the brain, of course, the long bone to protect the blood producing cells. It regulates calcium, and it also provides a place for hemopoiesis. Hemopoiesis is simply the formation of more red blood cells and so forth. So this is blood cell formation in the body. This blood cell formation usually happens in the bones as well. So these are some of the functions of bones. So there you've got your, on your right, on your left side, sorry, of the screen, you've got your skeletal, your muscular structure of the dog, and on your right, you've got the skeletal structure, which we've labored to look at. So it's just to give you a brief idea as well there. And then there we're showing some of the extreme bones in detail. We've got your carpal bones, the metacarpal bones, and the phalanges. And yeah, so that's to give you a basic idea as well of how the hind bones are broken down into. So the first one looks like for a dual-cloved animal, such as a cattle, goat, these are cloven-hooved. And then we've got on the bottom here, this one looks like mostly for a horse. These are the ones that only have one type of hoof, and also cattle as well. Okay, so let's look at the cardiovascular system. Okay, so this one is composed of the heart, the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries. The parts and functions of the cardiovascular system. The heart. This one provides blood pressure during systole. Systole is when the blood is actually compressing, when the heart is compressing and releasing out the blood from the heart and pumping it to various parts of the body. So we've got elastic arteries. These ones conduct blood and maintain pressure during diastole. Diastole is when now after the pumping is done, there's now that extra now movement. This one is carried on and facilitated by the elastic arteries. So then we've got the muscular arteries. These are arteries that are found in running through the various muscles in the body. These ones distribute blood and maintain pressure. This is through muscle contractions and so forth. So even our muscles help with we help in the blood to continue flowing and maintaining pressure by compressing against the particular arteries. Then we've got your arterioles. These ones, the arteries will now break down into arterioles, which are smaller. So the elastic arteries are bigger. Then you've got your muscular arteries, which are found in the muscles, which are slightly smaller. Then you have your arterioles, which will be more significantly smaller than the other arteries. So these ones provide peripheral resistance and distribute blood. So these ones are the ones that now enter into the periphery or the extremes of the body. So then we've got your capillaries. So from the arterioles, your arterioles will now break down into the even smaller type of blood vessels, which are known as capillaries. So with these ones, the capillaries can be small in terms of lumen to almost the size of one single red blood cell. A single red blood cell could be passing the time in a certain type of capillaries. So these are the areas where the exchange of nutrients and wastes happen and so forth. Because they are so small, they're able to intermingle with the cells at a micromolecular level as well. So from there now, the capillaries again will rejoin together and they'll form what we call venules. These are the smallest sets of or types of veins. These ones will collect blood and edema from the capillaries. From there, the venules will collect or will grow together and connect together, and they'll form what we call veins. The veins now will transmit blood to the large veins for reservoir. Then from the large veins are the ones that will receive the lymph and return blood to the heart. So from the large veins, again, we go back to the heart. The heart again will produce this pressure, which will pump out the blood, and the process again will restart. So those are the basic different parts in the cardiovascular system. So here's a schematic drawing, or sort of a brief schematic illustration of how blood flows. So you've got your heart there on top. They'll go onto the arteries. The arteries will divide further into arterioles. Arterioles will divide further and supply the capillaries. The capillaries there'll be exchange of water, nutrients, cells, proteins, hormones, CO2 and O2, and all these different chemicals and so forth. So from there now, once all these exchanges are done, the capillaries will now coalesce or be attached together or fuse together to form smaller venules. The venules will now reattach each other and form veins, and the veins will now take the blood to the heart, and then the sequence can restart again. So that's basically the whole system now on a gross scale. You've got your systematic capillaries, the head, the upper extremities, and so forth. Basically, all these systems, regardless of their names and so forth, I won't labor into going through their names again. I'll end up boring the class. So, but basically, this is to give you an idea. So you have firstly your blood. The ones labeled in red, in blue, those are your arteries and your arterioles, and then you've got your red, which are now taking back the blood to the body and so forth. The blue ones, are the ones that taking back the blood. Then you've got the red ones, which are your arteries, which are taking blood to all the parts of the body. Okay, so let's look at now the lymphatic system. There are a whole lot of systems that one should be able to know of that the body constitutes. And I think I've labored to try my best to give it all to you in at least a minimum of a session or so. So now the lymphatic system, this one retains the fluid from the tissues to the circulatory system. This one consists of lymph. Lymph is the actual fluid that where your all the immune cells, be it the white blood cells, the macrophages, the CD4 cells, the T4 cells, the even the simple antigens and antibodies and so forth. These are the systems in which they follow. So this one will consist of lymph, it will consist of lymphatic vessels, and it will consist of lymphatic structures. So it's almost a system on its own, and it's distributed to almost every part of the body. As you can see here, we've labeled, we've got different types of locations of different lymph nodes. So you've got lymph nodes in your head, in the head, which are known as adenoids, and your tonsils, of course. All those are part of the lymphatic systems. So usually, especially in children, you'll find that there's a very common reaction of tonsils, and they tend to enlarge, and usually they're withdrawn out. Usually that's a reaction in the lymphatic system that leads to either too much of white blood cells being produced, too much of immune cells being produced, maybe due to maybe a significant attack. And children generally have a lower immune system compared to adults. So you have all these reactions in earlier stages. So you've got your spleen. Your spleen is also part of the lymphatic system. You've got the thymus, which is also part of the lymphatic system. And of course, your gota as well. Those are also part of your lymphatic system. So when they react, you've also got all these tonsils around the pelvis. And certain times when we have, say, a particular pain, say, on the leg, you'll notice to say there also be swelling of certain lymph nodes in the tongue. So that's also just an immune response to say a lot of lymph is being produced in that area to protect or to attack whatever has attacked the body. So basically, that's how the lymphatic system works and how the immune system works. So now we've got our lymph nodes. Our lymph nodes filters and traps foreign particles that contain white blood cells. So once the white blood cells are moving around in the body, once they find a pathogen that is foreign to them, they obviously engulf it, carry it away from the systems wherever they found it, and take it to the lymph nodes. So that's why when you see certain lymph nodes react, like I mentioned earlier, it might be a lymph node on the thigh. Those ones are simply showing you to say a lot of white blood cells have carried a lot of pathogens. So there's a likelihood of an infection, be it bacterial, be it viral, around that particular area. And they also contain white blood cells, which help to do this job. So if there's always inflammation or increase in any lymph node in the body that's of an animal, that's always a sign to say there's a pathogenic or a process or pathognomic process happening in that particular area. So even when you're doing postmortems in future, you'll be able to refer to say, whichever area I find a reaction in the lymph nodes, it's supposed to simply tell me to say, in this area, I should suspect there was either an infection or an inflammation of some sort, which caused this increase. So we've also got tonsils. This protects against bacteria. So they, like the same system works, they filter and trap foreign objects and foreign particles as the white blood cells are running through the body. Then we've got the thymus. This one helps with the immunologic cells. Then we've got the spleen. The spleen clears out old red blood cells. So like, not like as if you've known it before, well and good. But in general, red blood cells have got a lifespan of about 120 days. That's in humans. But in different animals, there's a whole variation of how long a red blood cell can stay. So many, after they reach a certain stage, you expect them to be cleared out, and it's the spleen that does this. It will digest it, it will process them and excrete them. So what are the functions of the lymphatic system? It removes excess fluids from the body tissues. It will absorb fatty acids. It will transport fat. So this is also the system that is responsible for transporting fat in the body. It produces immune cells such as lymphocytes. These are the ones that help combat all these infections. So there is simply an X-ray of a normal to a lung with a respiratory infection on the side. So you can see how hazy the lung that is infected looks compared to the normal one, but that's a bit off topic. Okay. So let's look at the digestive system. The digestive system functions involves prehension, which is simply the ingestion or the biting off of food, digestion, which is simply now the digesting of food through the processes of the breakdown. Then we've got the absorption of food. Then we've got the elimination of waste material as feces. That's basically how the digestive system works. They will first be hence inside or taken up. Then from there, they'll be digested, then will be absorbed as food, and then they'll be eliminated as solid waste material. So we've got parts. We've got the oral cavity, the esophagus. From the oral cavity, that's where food is taken in. The esophagus will take it to the stomach, which is the gastric or the gastro. Then we've got the small intestines, then the large intestines, then the rectum and the anus and so forth. So that's basically what involves the GIT or the gastrointestinal tract. What are some of the functions? Firstly, it moves food. So how does it move food? There's a process known as peristalsis. So peristalsis is the process simply by which food is moved through the esophagus. So it also secretes digestive juices. This is mostly in the stomachs, be it the four stomachs or the single monogastric stomachs. There's always release of all sorts of digestive juices, which will act now as media for all these digestive enzymes to occur. Then we've got also, it will absorb digested foods such as water and electrolytes. And so now let's look at the stomach also of ruminants. I know we are mostly looking at canine and feline anatomy, but I took the liberty to also fuse in a bit of ruminant anatomy because, like I said, most of the anatomy for the GIT is almost the same in all animals, but the ones that always differ is the ruminants. These ones have got what we call four chambers. I think in the nutrition, I just mentioned to say they've got four stomachs, and the four chambers or the four stomachs are the rumen, the reticulum, the omasum, and the abomasum. So the abomasum is the one that can be likened to the single stomach in monogastric animals such as pigs or humans. The way the stomach linings of the normal human is the way the abomasum it looks like in a cattle or in a goat or a sheep. So then there's all these other three now, the omasum, the reticulum, and the rumen that have got specific different structures. So now that's the dorsal rumen, we've got the ventral rumen, the omasum, reticulum there, the abomasum there. So this is just basically how its anatomy looks like. So now let's look at the ruminant digestive system. So it's a bit different from the other standard digestive systems. Like I said, that's why I decided to fuse it in and to give us a bit of some more ideas about it as well. So ruminant digestive system, firstly, we have ingestion. Then ingestion, the rumen and reticulum work together with some symbiotic bacteria that help break down feed. The reticulum sorts the feed and sends it back to be chewed further. So there's this system which cattle have, and these other ruminants such as goats, which is known as chewing the cud. So this one is usually because of the reticulum and the rumen, which tend to work together. When they digest, when they break down the food a bit, there's a system whereby it always makes the food to come out, and then you see your cattle chewing. So sometimes you'd be surprised, but there's no food around. Why is this cattle chewing? That's what we refer to as chewing the cud. Because of the rumen and the reticulum, cattle have got this system whereby they always send back the food. After they digest, the rumen and the reticulum digest it a bit, they'll send it back again into the mouth to be chewed again. Then they'll take it back in and what we call regurgitation, which is simply reswallowing of the same. So now the reticulum sorts the feed and sends it back to be chewed further. The cow regurgitates and rechews the cud to break down the fibers further. So it's a rinse and repeat process until it gets to a point whereby the stomach now is satisfied to say, okay, now this particular grass, we can easily now digest the cellulose and so forth, those things we talked about, and break it down and use it for energy and so forth. So now the omasum removes the water from the feed. That's the main function for the omasum. It's simply just to remove water. So it's got this compressive condensation properties which tend to remove water. Then abomasum, where digestion continues. Like I said, the abomasum functions like the way normal stomachs in humans or pigs or rabbits, which have got one stomachs, or cats and dogs. It functions now the same way. It will release all these fancy enzymes which are in the stomach. It will release HCl, hydrochloric acid, and it will do all its processes normally as with any animal. So note, many of the nutrients a cow receives comes from byproducts of the bacteria that help the cow digest the hay and the grass it eats. I'm sure I talked about this process in detail when we talked about nutrition, so I won't try to repeat myself regarding this point. But you can feel free to ask it in the session after the session is done if you need clarification on it. So now, parts of the respiratory system. What are the parts for and what are they used for? So for conducting air, that's basically for transporting air in and out of the respiratory system. We've got our nasal cavity, we've got our nasopharynx, the larynx, the trachea, the bronchi, the bronchioles, and also for exchanging the gas, we've got the alveoli, which is the last and smallest unit where all these gases exchange happen from. So what are the functions of the respiratory system? These ones include inspiration and expiration. Inspiration is simply the taking in of air, and expiration is simply the taking out. What does it do? It provides exchange for respiratory gases. So it will exchange all these gases. Your CO2 will be taken out, the oxygen or the O2 will be taken in. So, and then we've got it warms and cleans and humidifies the air. This is important in order because the air that we're inhaling in most cases is cooler than the actual normal body temperature. So it will have to be warmed for it to be in constant or hemostatic to the body environment. It also aids in olfaction and phonation. Phonation is simply producing of sounds. So you've got your larynx there that is able to produce all these sounds, the barking that you get from the dogs, the meows that you get from the cats. All these come from the help of the same respiratory system through the larynx and the cords. Let's look at the reproductive system. What are the functions of the reproductive system? It provides a process for reproduction, production of offspring, and some of the parts of the reproductive systems in female and male animals. So we'll try and look at it. So now, since the whole focus here is to look at the system of cats and dogs, so this is your typical anatomy of the reproductive system in a dog. So you've got your testis there, you've got your penis and extrapelvic urethra there. You've got your ducts, the deferens, which takes the sperms from the actual testicles through the urinary bladder, through the prostate, and onto the penis for release. And you've also got your ureter there and your urinary bladder there, where all this urethra passes through. And this is the anatomy of the cat. As you can see, in terms of names of parts, it's almost the same, but in terms of conformation, it's quite different and more cocky. And in terms of location, you see that most of the urinary system and the reproductive system in the cats are very inside compared to those of the dog. So this is even why it makes it harder for you to naturally recognize the sex of a cat compared to the sex of a dog. Because with dogs, you're able to see externally the penis there, and you're able to see externally the vagina. But in terms of cats, you always have to, even if it's a fully grown cat, you won't see the actual penis clearly. You'd have to actually, especially when they're younger, you'd have to just, when cats are younger, that's when it's also very, very hard, mostly hard to determine the sex, because it almost looks the same. There's always a sort of an opening on an orifice, which always looks the same, but there's always a protruding sort of pimple that would differentiate to say, okay, this is male and this is female. But this is the reason why it's harder in cats to recognize the sex, because most of the organs are sort of pushed inside, and as you can see, the penis is sort of inside the body as well, and it only comes out when need be, rather as compared to the penis of a dog, which is just lying externally on the ventrum there. So parts of the urinary system, you've got your kidneys, the urinary bladder, ureters, and the urethra, which is also part of the reproductive. So these ones are simply responsible for excretion and excretion of urine, of waste through urine. So what are the functions? It absorbs metabolites, storage of urine temporarily, and or through the bladder, of course, and it also eliminates urine and excretes waste products. Well, and let's now look at the endocrine system. We're really rushing. So we're trying to cover as many systems as we can in the space given. So now the endocrine system, this is made up of the pituitary gland, which is in the brain. We've also got the thyroid gland, which is on the neck. We've also got the parathyroid gland, and we've also got the adrenal glands. We've also got other related parts such as the pancreas, the gonads. Gonads are simply the sex type of organs, the ovaries and the testicles and so forth. Then we've also got the GIT tract, which also plays a role in the endocrine system. So what are the functions of the endocrine system? Well, firstly, it releases hormones. Secondly, it regulates metabolism. So this is the one that sends signals to the brain to regulate, to say, okay, this state of excitement can end now. This state of excitement can start now. There are all these hormonal responses that different animals, even us as humans, react to. But all these are usually controlled by the endocrine system through the release and the regulation of hormones in the body. It also regulates growth and development. This is through the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland is the one that helps regulate how much an animal grows and how little it grows as well. And we've also got regulation of tissue function. Like I said, it's through always hormonal control, and it also regulates the mood or the moods of the animal. So you might find, even in human animals, you might find that during, say, estrus, there's a lot of estrogen that's present, and it will affect the mood swings that normally you see in humans. All that is part of the physiology that makes up the endocrine system. So you will find all these mood swings because of elevated estrogen levels and the drop of testosterone levels, and all these mixtures and combination of hormonal imbalances that are happening. So all these are regulated by a system we call the endocrine system. Parts of the nervous system. So let's now look at the nervous system. So the nervous system is divided into two: the central nervous system, which is the CNS, and the peripheral nervous system, which is the PNS. So the central nervous system is simply made up of the brain and the spinal cord. Then the peripheral nervous system is made up of the somatic nerves and the automatic nerves. So these two guys, these are in terms of connection, the central nervous system is the one that has all these control over even the peripheral nervous system. But there are certain reactions, as anyways, I wish we had more time. There'll be certain reactions in an animal's body that don't require the brain in order for an animal to respond. So these ones are mostly just undertaken by the peripheral nervous system. An example of a function I can relate to where the PNS, or the peripheral nervous system, is mostly involved is, for instance, a patella test. I don't know if any of us have been to the hospital and we've had our patella or our knee hammered, and there'll be always that response to kick. Those responses are normally peripheral nervous system response. They are all sort of automatic. You don't need the brain to give it a response or a go ahead, because they're in the periphery. So there are certain responses like that. But generally, the chain of command is always from the brain to the spinal cord then to the somatic and the automatic nerves as well. Okay, so now the functions of the nervous system. It controls the functions and movement of organs, muscles, and sensory organs. So all these are controlled by the nervous system. So how does it do this? The neurons will relay and receive information. So every information, be it a sensory information or pain and so forth, perception, response, it will always be relayed by what we call the neurons. The neurons, they will then conduct electrochemical signals. So all these signals or all these sensations that we receive, be it the sense of touch and so forth, they are all in form of electrical signals that are then interpreted by the brain to give us a certain type of sensation or touch of wherever the pain is, or be it even a simple touch and so forth. So the central nervous system, or the CNS, the brain is the central information processing organ of the body. Then the spinal cord, this is a long, thin tubular bundle of nerves. It's connected to the brain. So the peripheral nervous system, we've got the somatic nerves, like I mentioned earlier. These ones control voluntary muscles that provide movement. So with these ones, these are voluntary muscles. Like I gave an example of a patella test, whereby when you eject on your knee, those are those are voluntary. Those are involuntary, sorry, but voluntary ones are whereby you want to, maybe an animal wants to move from point A to B. There has to be that connection with the brain, and then there'll be that movement that will happen. Then we've got the autonomic nerves. These are the ones that now control involuntary responses. So these ones are sort of automatic. They won't really have to have a brain command for the movement to happen. So basically, these ones are sort of just automatic. So when an animal is near too much heat, it will be almost an automatic response to want to move away from that heat or fire. So those are involuntary. So these are the ones such as the smooth muscles, the cardiac muscles, the glands, and the organs. Those are almost always. These are movements that the body doesn't need to, the brain doesn't need to be communicated to for movements to happen, such as beating of the heart. This is something that is always supposed to be taking place. So these ones are always there. And the same movement of cardiac muscle, the heart always has to pump. It likes it or not, it doesn't need permission from the brain. So these are the autonomic nerves that we're talking about. So now, let's talk about asepsis, then we can end today's lecture with asepsis. So asepsis, so now we've known about the anatomy of basically the general anatomy of an animal, be it the feline, the canine, and of course a bit of some ruminant. So we've known the general anatomy. We've known the physiology, what really happens for an animal to function the way it functions, what happens to the body parts to function the way it functions. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is in terms of asepsis. Asepsis is in terms of what are the correct practices as a surgical assistant that you need to do. Maybe your veterinary surgeon in your area might require assistance in terms of when they're carrying out a surgery, or in future when you get good yourself, there will likely be a time when you start doing surgeries on your own. So what are the things that are needed or you need to practice as a good assistant? And this is what we're generally going to talk about and close with. This is what we call as asepsis. So asepsis, like I said earlier on, is creating an environment free of bacteria, viral, or any pathogenic. Working in a bacterial-free or pathogenic-free environment, that's asepsis. So what are the golden rules of surgery? This was extracted from a handbook published in 1930 by Professor A. Charles Gofford and the wife, Mrs. Prudence Gofford. Then the court says, no one is fitted to practice of surgery unless he or she have a special knowledge of anatomy, including embryology and histology. So basically, we now have a basic understanding of what anatomy is and a bit of some physiology and how certain parts work. A special knowledge of physiology and physiological chemistry. I think we have now just the basic. I can't say we have all of it in this particular 1.5 hour we've tackled, but we have a basic of it. And you must have a special knowledge of pathology. Pathology is simply how certain parts are affected and how they will look and so forth. And you must have a wide clinical experience in general medicine, a sound judgment, and a sound fraud, and some natural mechanical ability. So now, the first key in asepsis is disinfection. So always the area that you're working on during surgery or as a surgical assistant, you always need to make sure it's disinfected. Be it the table that where the surgery is going to be conducted on, it always has to be disinfected. So here in this table here, we have a list of all these type of chemicals that have been used as good for disinfectants. So we've got alcohol, such as isopropyl alcohol, which is about 70 to 50% ethyl alcohol. It's good for spot cleaning, injection site preparation, and it has got very good disinfection properties. And there at the end, it describes how it works. Then you've got also your chlorine compounds, such as your hypochlorite. Hypochlorite is that the active ingredient that's found in your common jig. Common household jig is made up of hypochlorite. Then you've also got your iodine compounds, such as your iodophores. These ones are the ones that we even found naturally in homes as iodine povidone, which we use for cleaning of wounds. So those ones are also very good as disinfectants when cleaning any tops that where you're likely to do your surgery from, or your surgical area. We've also got glutaraldehyde, 2% alkaline solution. This is also good for disinfection of lenses and delicate instruments, such as maybe the instruments which you might be using during surgery and so forth. So these are some of the disinfectants that you're going to need on a day-to-day basis as a veterinary nurse or a veterinary assistant. Sterilization. So sterilization techniques, this is basically can be through steaming, or can be through chemical gas such as ethylene glycol, or it can be through plasma sterilization with use of hydrogen peroxide, or it can be through ionizing radiation or cold chemical sterilization. So steam sterilization, this one destroys microbes by coagulation and cellular protein degeneration. So steaming is a type of sterilization. There are certain type of special instruments which you'll be exposed to in the near future, hopefully, that tend to do this job. It is what we call an autoclave machine. So this one bases its cleaning or disinfection properties on the steaming process there that takes place. So then we've also got gravity downward displacement sterilizer. This one also works in the same way and works for about 10 to 25 minutes at around 132 to 135 degrees, or at 121 degrees for 15 to 30 minutes. We've also got pre-vacuum sterilizer or flash sterilization. All these for under steaming type of sterilization. So we've also got gas sterilization. This one uses ethylene glycol gas. This one kills microbes and spores via alkylation. So it's safe for endoscopes, cameras, plastics, power cables, and cannot be steam paralyzed. So these ones there are certain instruments that always have power cords with them and so forth, which when exposed to water might get damaged or might cause electrocution. So these ones are good to use for gas sterilization. Exposure time depends on the concentration, humidity, temperature, density, and type of material that's being used. So always aerate all materials sterilized with ethylene glycol for a minimum of 7 days or at least 12 hours in an aerator. It can cause cutaneous burns, nausea, vomiting, headaches, weakness, upper and lower respiratory irritation, destruction of red blood cells, and birth defects. So those are some of the effects of ethylene glycol that you must be aware of if you ever come across using such a chemical. So then we've got also clean and dry items. First, that they should be cleaned first. Moisture and organic matter bonds with ethylene oxide, leaving a toxic residue. So you need to always clean, because moisture and organic matter tends to bond with this same ethylene oxide, and then it might leave a toxic residue, which might be poisonous to you as the assistant, or even to the animal that you're likely to be working on. We've also got plasma sterilization. This is a process that involves UV irradiation, photodesorption, and chemical etching. The spores are basically made up of simple atoms like carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and hydrogen, and so forth. The radicals react with these atoms to form simple compounds like CO2, which is carbon dioxide, which can subsequently be flushed out when the organism loses such atoms that are extrinsic to its survival and it dies. The hydrogen peroxide can be used. Instruments can be sterilized for 75 minutes and do not need aeration. Items for sterilization must be wrapped in polypropylene and non-woven fabric. It can be used for stainless steel, aluminum, brass, silicone, Teflon, latex, ethyl vinyl acetate, polycarbonate, polypropylene, and etc. Such type of instruments or materials can be used for this particular type of sterilization. And it cannot be used for linen, gauze, sponges, wood, some plastics, liquids, items that cannot be disassembled, such as copper or silver, tubes and catheters greater than 12 inches and less than 3 millimeters in diameter. So then we've also got ionizing irradiation. This one is mostly for commercial use, and items such as suture materials, sponges, and disposable items such as gowns and drapes and powders and petroleum goods can be used for this one. Do not re-sterilize prepackaged irradiated items that have been opened, could damage item and be a health hazard. So this one, before you buy any suture material or when you buy disposable items such as your sponges and so forth, which you're going to be using, these are disposable. You never use a cotton wool when you use it again for cleaning a bloody spot. So these ones are, this is what they use to radiate them or keep them germ-free. It is through ion radiation. So for us as a common health tip, as an assistant, a veterinary assistant, it's always important to discard off such items. So within the last one is a cold chemical sterilization. This is for delicate laced instruments such as endoscopes, cytoscopes, bronchoscopes, clean and dry items before immersion. And then organic matter may prevent penetration of crevices or joints and residue water and causes chemical dilution. So it's always important that you clean up whichever instrument you're trying to disinfect properly, so that you don't leave any debris or dirt. So because that tends to cause chemical dilution and it will not make the cold chemical sterilization very effective. So disassemble complex items. So if the item you're using for surgery or so forth or testing is very complex, in order to reach all the crevices and all the points of that instrument, it's important that you just unscrew it and then sterilize it properly. So rinse thoroughly with sterile water and dry the sterile towels to avoid damaging patient's tissues. So common sterilants in cold chemical sterilization are glutaraldehyde, 2%, for a minimum of 10 hours is required for sterilization. We've got chlorine dioxide in a 1 to 5 mixture, can be mixed daily, or a 1 to 18 mixture, which is good for about 14 days. 1 to 5 is a good sterilant, 1 to 18 is a disinfectant. So as you can see, the less concentrated your chlorine is, it makes it a disinfectant and not a sterilant. A sterilant always has to have a very, very high concentration in order to sterilize properly. Sodium hypochlorite, like I said, the common name jig is also can be used for sterilization as well. Okay. Common sterilants. Other acceptable sterilants are the following chemicals. These are chemical ingredients of some of the commercial sterilants. We've got glutaraldehyde and formaldehyde and stabilized hydrogen peroxide, 6%. And formaldehyde can be either at 8%, alcohol at 70%, and glutaraldehyde at 2%. So always, whenever you're going to buy a disinfectant, be it for disinfecting your poultry, be it for disinfecting a particular surgical site or the room where you're doing all these operations from, always check the labels and see if it's within the range that is likely to help you with sterilization or keeping your surgical place clean. So it's always important, like I mentioned last time, to always make sure you always check the label. So heat, these ones are glass bead sterilizers. These ones are also good and is effective at sterilizing materials that are not heat sensitive, such as metal instruments. So rinse the heated instruments in cool sterile saline before introducing the instruments as body part. Not all approved for surgical sterilization. Some may cause certain reactions. So sterilization in the indicators. So what are some of the indicators that would tell you to say, okay, have I done a good job at sterilizing or cleaning these instruments, or have I done a bad job? So they may undergo either a chemical or biological change in response to some combination of time and temperature. So always watch out for these to as a marker or as an indicator, or as to whether you've done a good job or not on your materials. So now, you've got chemical indicators. These ones will indicate the conditions for sterility, whether they've been met or not. So then placed in the center of a pack and on the outside of the item to be sterilized. So these ones, they are available commercially, which will help you indicate certain parameters to say, well, have we done a good job in sterilizing, or have we done a bad job? So we've also got biological indicators that might be available. And these ones are the surest way of testing the effectiveness of a process. You use a strain of highly resistant, non-pathogenic and spore-forming bacteria in a glass vial placed on the pack. After culture, the contents of the vial, growth of bacteria indicates inadequate sterilization. So there are certain, these are culture type of indicators whereby you sort of, after cleaning and sterilizing your so-called instrument, you do a culture test and you see if there will be any bacterial growth on a particular culture. That will also be able to tell you whether you've done a good job at cleaning the particular materials or not. Surgical packs. So handling and storage of sterilized instruments and equipment. This allows the pack to cool and dry individually on racks when removed from the autoclave. So always allow them to cool after you've heated them or you've done any of those processes. Then you store the sterile packs when they are completely dry in a waterproof dust covers in a closed cabinet. So you always cover them nicely in plastics after they've been sterilized. So handle the sterile supplies gently, careful of pointed or have sharp edges. Ensure seal is not broken or package punctured, so that this way it will enable that no bacteria is entering into your packet. So then store the sterile packs away from ventilation ducts, sprinklers, or heat-producing light. All these can tend to affect how well your packs are stored and if they are going to remain disinfected or they'll be reinfected again. And handling of sterile packs continued. So a sterile shelf life. So there are two ways in which, after you've disinfected all your materials, be it your surgical instruments and so forth, there's a particular time that is allowed to store them before the next use. After a certain particular time, you might regard them as the period for disinfection has ended, and you're going to have to re-disinfect and re-sterilize the equipment. So the sterile shelf life can either be time-related expiration. This has rather been a controversial one because events, not time, contaminate the product. So there have been all these academic and scientific arguments towards this type of sterile shelf life, because the argument by certain scientists is to say you can have an instrument that has been nicely disinfected and nicely stored away to get contaminated because it's just been there. And their defense is always to say it's certain events, maybe say contact to the same items and so forth, that will likely contaminate the product, not time itself to end up contaminating the product. So there's also the other type, which is event-related expiration. With these ones, the packs remain sterile unless the pack is opened. So with these ones, whether the pack where you've stored it is worn, torn, or has been broken, a seal is damaged, or in any other way. So do not use a sterile pack that has been damaged. So whenever you're dealing with your instruments, your surgical instruments, always ensure that you give your surgeon the instruments that have a nicely, tightly packed seal. This will enable you to work better. So rules of asepsis. We're going to look at the rules of asepsis, then we're going to end this class. So operating room personnel must practice strict standard precautions, i.e. blood and body substance isolation. Your body and the blood substance should always be isolated. 2, all items, be it the surgical instruments, the needles, the sutures, dressings, covers, and solutions used in operating room must be sterile. we've talked about how to sterilize the equipment and how to keep them sterile for some time. Next up, all operating room personnel must perform a surgical scrub. So always you make sure you're not in your normal clothing, but you scrub up. There are certain materials which we call a surgical scrub, which you need to scrub up in order to be regarded as sterile. Then all operating room personnel are required to wear specific clean attire with the goal of shading the outside environment from the inside one. Specific clothing requirements are prescribed and standardized for all operating rooms. A, operating room or personnel must wear a sterile gown, gloves, and special shoe covers. I'm sure if you've ever been to a hospital, you will see all these special shoe covers, plastic covers, or if you've been to a lab that health personnel wear, and they'll also be wearing all these gown and all these sterile gloves. Sterile gloves are not these normal latex gloves which you find, but they're sterilized and they're nicely packaged specifically for surgery. So masks must be worn at all times in the operating room for the purpose of minimizing airborne contamination. They must be changed between operations and more often if necessary. So the reason why we always mask up during the surgery is to make sure that we minimize as much as we can contamination, because as we all are aware, our mouth carries a lot of normal flora, bacteria such as staphylococcus and so forth, which if we were speaking openly, we're likely to contaminate even the area we're working on from. What's rule number 5? Any personnel who harbor pathogenic organisms, e.g. those with colds or infections, must report themselves unable to be in the operating room to protect the client from outside pathogens. So it's always important to say if you have a cold and you have an infection, never always be part of that operating room team, because you might end up now transferring all these infections onto the animal that is being operated on. Scrub personnel, that's number 6. Scrub personnel wearing sterile attire should touch only sterile items. So there's always a personnel who are scrubbed, and those are the ones we regard as sterile. So those ones, they should only touch sterile items and not non-sterile items. Then sterile gowns and sterile drapes have defined borders of sterility. Sterile surfaces and articles may touch other sterile surfaces or articles and remain sterile. Contact with unsterile objects at any point renders a sterile area contaminated. So always have a system whereby during the operation, you always have an area which should always be regarded as a sterile area. Then there should also be an area which is just regarded as the dirty area. This is what, and then there should never be a mixture of these sterilized instruments. Those ones should always stay in the sterile zone or sterile area. And your sterile area is where the patient is on, your animal, and also the table where your instruments are. And there should never be contamination from someone who's non-sterile. So now a circulator and an unsterile personnel must stay at the periphery of the sterile operating area to keep the sterile area free from contamination. That's point number 8. So always ensure to say those that are not sterile, they always stay away from the sterile area. So number 9, the utmost caution and vigilance must be used when handling sterile fluids to prevent splashing and spillage. So always make sure to say you handle these fluids properly. So number 10, anything that is used for one client must be discarded or in some cases re-sterilized. So make sure if the instruments that can be re-sterilized, they're sterilized before being used to on the next surgery. And if there are instruments that cannot be re-sterilized, they're disposed off or discarded before the next surgery as well. So let's look at what is a non-sterile field and what is a sterile field. As you can see, all the areas that have been labeled green there, those are sterile areas. And all the areas that have been labeled from the table going down, all those are non-sterile areas. So that area there in the front of the surgeon, the gloves and so forth, all those areas there, we need to make sure always to say they're only in contact with sterile environment or sterile things only, so as not to contaminate the area. So operating room or theater. The room size should be large enough to allow personnel to move around the sterile equipment without contamination and to accommodate large pieces of equipment. So the area in which you're operating from should be large enough to allow these movements. So use smooth, non-porous, fireproof materials and 4 floors, ceilings, and other surfaces. And also design ventilation systems to provide positive air pressures within the operating room and lower the air pressures within the adjoining corridors. Install scavenging systems that pull anesthetic gases out of the operating room. So keep operating room environments at a constant humidity and temperature. So the operating room. Install main overhead fluorescent lights supplemented by use of at least 1 halogen spotlight. So these lights are just to enable the surgeon to be able to see clearly what they're working on. So use stainless steel operating tables that are fully adjustable for a height and degree and tilt of tabletops that are flat or one-piece surfaces that have V-trough capabilities. So there are all these types of tables and special tables, if you've been fortunate enough to come across them, that have been recommended here. So instrument tables should be made of stainless steel and should be adjustable in height. Provide kick buckets to discard soiled sponges during surgery and suction of each other. A radiographic view box and a wall clock should be installed. Those are some of the things that should be able to give the surgeon some direction. If he's looking, maybe say, if he's doing an orthopedic surgery, they should be at least looking at a particular x-ray whereby they're able to determine what they're working on and how it's relating to how the x-ray came out and so forth. So use supply cabinets with tight fitting doors to minimize dust accumulation, to store suture materials, dressings, sponges, scalpel blades, and frequently used items. So the storage space where you normally store these instruments should be as tightly sealed as possible. This is to enable you to store your instruments properly and to ensure that they're not reinfected. So veterinary common procedures, basic procedures a veterinary nurse should know, to be covered next week. So this is where I'll end today's lesson. I think I've passed more than 16:30 where I was supposed to end that and allow the podium for questions. But basically, I needed to finish this part. It might have seemed boring a bit, but this is something you ought to know in your course. There are certain courses that you just need to know to be a part of something. Certain courses are a bit of course, might seem rhetorical, might seem unnecessary, but with time they'll be very important, especially the same one we're looking at anatomy and so forth. So basically, next session we'll definitely look at what are some of the common veterinary medical procedures. Maybe this will be more interesting for you as a nurse. We'll look at how to administer fluids. What fluids to administer, how to do certain injections, what type of injections are there, and all those things. How to do certain procedures such as cannulating and so forth. Those are some of the things that basically almost all veterinary nurses need to know and be able to assist a veterinary surgeon. So for now, I think I'll close this slide and we'll stop sharing the screen so that we can now open the floor for questions. I'll stop the share here and we can allow the floor to be open for questions. If there are any questions, you can raise your hand so that I can get some more clarifications. If there's clarification somewhere where you need it, I'll be able to happily provide it. And I hope today's session was as helpful and informative as it can be. So are there any questions, any hands, any contributions, additions, subtractions, and so forth? I'll be happy to hear from you. You can show by a raise of hands. Okay, Mr. Webster Chibesa, let me ask that you be unmuted.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Doc.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, yes, Doc. It was so interesting today. However,
Thank you.
because of the network